Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort, and it is Friday. What a week. This week blew by. Something, time flies when you're having fun or something. I don't know. It is about 6 a.m., and I am definitely ready for the weekend. It's been a week. I told you guys I was being pretty productive. I did another batch of work yesterday and turned that in, and going above expectations. So feels pretty good. So also got a chance to play some TFT games. Definitely was gaining LP, which is good. Definitely some frustrating moments. Having a Swain 3 with a bajillion armor and armor augments and still dying in 8 seconds to AD comps was a little infuriating, but even that game was still a top 4, so I can't complain. But by the time you see this, little inside scoop for those of you, I believe there will actually be a C patch today. They're fixing a couple bugs, and then they snuck in a Gangplank nerf. So I think that's coming out. I think it was supposed to go out last night, but they didn't quite fix the exploit they were trying to deal with, so they're changing their tactics and doing it again today. So that'll get done. Do me a favor though, and don't just run off and make a Reddit post on this or something. It's like I said, it'll be there this after early, but it was getting late last night, and I think they needed some more time. But again, the thing I have to give the team credit on is the effort is S tier. If anything, and this is, maybe I shouldn't talk about this, but I think in the team giving 10,000% effort, which they're doing a great job of, now my biggest concern is actually burnout, right? I think they're really trying to live up to players' expectations right now and deliver a great set. And it's hard. I've said it for years. This game's hard to balance. This game's hard to work with. And, it's a lot. Now, thankfully, I know Tim had yesterday and today off. So hopefully he can recoup a little. But, yeah. And this is something as a manager you got to keep an eye on, is making sure that they're not pushing themselves too hard, Or in Kent's case, it's he's helping with live, but also he's helping with 16, So right now my job is help where I can, try to alleviate some of that pressure. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I also had some of my meetings with people on the other team because even though I was done with my work on the other team, I'm still giving them very, very light support. So did that yesterday. I don't know. Like I said, time is flying fast because I am doing a lot each day. So feels good. All right. I wrote down 5 questions. I'm skeptical I'm going to get through all 5, but let's start diving into them and see what we can get through here. All right. What is the best way to learn TFT as a new player? So this is such a fascinating question. And I think a lot of the times when you think about this question, it leads into well, TFT should have a tutorial and things like that. And a lot of debates about well, this game's hard. How do I learn it? And what's really interesting is I want you to put TFT aside for a second. Stop thinking about TFT. How did you learn any video game, right? Really think through all the video games you play. It's well, how did you learn them, right? And, I think back to how did I learn how to do a Hadouken? Well, I would look in the instruction book and it would say, down, diagonal, forward, punch. And then you would try it and you're oh, okay. And then you would sort of adapt that and things like that. And so it's some things you could learn through an instruction book, or a kid growing up playing a Zelda game and having that instruction manual and reading through that. Sometimes it was an in-game tutorial. But how did you learn how to play World of Warcraft? Well, it would teach you some things, But if anything, I remember the website ThoughtBot or whatever it was called, where you would just like look up the quest and it would tell you how to do it, right? You'd like look up answers. It's become a thing where it's like you look up answers. So think about how you learn other games. And the reason I bring this up is not because to talk about how other games teach, but also every person is going to have their own learning style, right? Some people learn through doing, some people learn through reading, and you need to figure out which learning style works the best for you, and then just apply that to TFT, right? So, for example, I'm the type of person, I don't like reading. I'm a TFT player. Hey. I like learning by doing. And so for me, the best way I learn a new game is like just jump in and start playing it, right? And then I can figure it out pretty quick. So I would, jump into TFT, probably some normal games, and just start going, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? Oh, I get it. And then as I got it, then I would accent that with like, okay, now that I get the basics, what are some of the advanced tactics? And this is where I would go read, a guide from somebody else, or either try to make up my own stuff, right? Like if I'm playing Smash Brothers, I might see some of the moves that Meta Knight's being used or whatever. And no, I'm not a Meta Knight player. I'm just using that as an example. It's like, oh, people really like his down air. That's a really high move. I should put that into my own rotation more and stuff like that. And it's like adapting your own learnings with the learnings of others, right? And I think that's one of the things I wish more people did is like when they're reading your TFT Academy sites or your whatever, it's like, oh, I see why they're doing this. I will adapt that into my own play style, not just this is my play style now. But yeah, so all of this is to say that the best way to learn TFT depends on your type of learning style. The other one I find really, really good is playing with somebody else, right? Like a common way I learned League of Legends was like I was playing with a couple other people at the time, and they would say like, oh, you should pick this type of character, and you would, make sure you try to CS here, right? Like you're getting essentially coaching because you're playing with your friends and you're ingesting it. So having someone to play with is also a really good way to learn. Find some Discord folks or play some double up or whatever, right? Like all of that can be a really valuable way to learn as well. So yeah, I don't know. Not to self-plug here, but I do find that like one of the reasons I try to play the way I do on stream is like it's basic enough that anyone can look at how I play and go, okay, I think I can emulate that, right? Where it's like pick a carry, build around them, think about some cool ideas, and eventually learn the combinatorics and have a good old time. And you can probably get to master no problem, So, but there's a lot of resources out there now. The game's becoming more and more popular. It feels like there's a lot more content for the game than there was 2 years ago. So there's a lot of resources out there. But yeah, that'd be my suggestion. Yeah, that's all I got. All right, there we go. We're blazing through these. Okay, this question was hard. Okay, I'm just going to read it. What is it about parenthood that makes you think of kids more than yourself? And I'm shorthanding this question. This question was very much a fundamental. The person was like, as someone who doesn't want to have kids and probably never will, what drives you to want to have kids and provide from somebody else? And this is the kind of conversation that's like way beyond my expertise, because there's a whole like human psychology, biology, nature, not to mention society, societal norms. Like there's a whole, you could talk about this for hours, because it's like, well, 100 years ago, why did people have kids and what drove them and the sense of purpose? And it's like, well, now with the way society is and the way jobs are, like, this is a complicated topic. I don't know that I want to get into all the nitty gritties of it. right? Like, you could talk about like, well, everyone should have a purpose. And then you see these streamers who are like, I'm just going to make money for the rest of my life. I don't care. Fuck y'all. You're like, yeah. So I'm going to try to answer this in my personal opinion, but I want you to understand I'm just a video game designer. And in this topic, this is a very difficult topic. And like, no one's going to have the right answer to this. Oh, yeah. Okay. So here's my answer. I believe that one of the things that gives humans a sense of purpose is providing for others. This can be being a good friend. This can be being a good coworker. This can be being a good parent and a family member, right? And you choose how big that circle around you is to provide and be a good person for. If you choose, now inherently you are born with family. So like by default, you come with that circle. Now you can choose to leave that circle, right? Some people have crappy families. It is what it is. Thankfully, despite having divorced parents that don't speak, I ended up with 2 good circles. Both sides of my family I get along with and work with for the most part. I try to be a good friend to the few people I get close to. I try to be a really good friend to them, So, and then obviously family. And so because I grew up with someone with a nice family, the idea of having my own family was good. Now, in some ways, I'll be honest with you, low rolling a son with pretty severe autism has kind of made that harder, but that doesn't change the game. You still love your kids and want to provide for them. And like I said, that gives you a sense of purpose, because otherwise, if your sense of purpose is merely self-fulfillment, then what was the reason you existed, And so my belief is that I am here to bring good to the world through the people I'm close to, and then I've lucked into an ability in a profession where I can bring good to the world through things like TFT and video games and stuff like that. And like I said, that's what gives me a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment. And I believe that a society works best when you have many people like this who are out there not just thinking of themselves, but thinking of the greater whole of humanity. Now, is that the world we live in? Nope. And that's a shame. But, so to your question, the thing that I think gives me fulfillment and purpose is taking care of bringing pleasure to others. Not in that way. But like I said, this is just my personal take, right? And like, I understand and am self-aware enough that that is not everyone's personal take. Everyone else has a different purpose, right? And like I said, I'm not going to get into it because it's a complicated topic, way beyond my level of expertise. So, but hopefully that gives you at least a satisfactory answer for me. Everyone's going to be different. And like I said, I'm just a game designer, man. I'm not going to solve all of humanity's problems on how to associate with themselves, and studies back through time about how societies fell and came and power corrupts people. Oh my God, like I said, you could talk about this for hours. I don't want to. So there you go. All right, back to the good stuff. Traitless champions. How do you design them? Feels weird. Okay, so traitless champions actually are pretty simplistic when you think about it, okay? And I want you to think about it like this. If you have a champion, let's say it's a 3 cost, okay? I'm going to give it a numerical value, okay? Let's just say, to keep it simple, and this is to abstract the power of a champion, okay? But let's say this 3 cost is 100 DPS. Okay, that's just its abstract power. Now, when you put items on that champion, that multiplies that DPS, right? So you put a jeweled gauntlet on them, now they're at 150 DPS. You put a death cap on them, now they're at 200 DPS, right? Like, you have a baseline numerical value for the champion, and items are a multiplier on that champion. Now, traits are also a multiplier on that champion, right? So like if you have a 3-cost champion with no traits active, 100 DPS. Now you have a 3-cost champion who has their 6-piece active, and that's 200 DPS, right? And again, I'm abstracting this here, but you get the idea is that traits, items, augments are all multipliers onto the base value, okay? A traitless champion essentially loses the opportunity to have that trait multiplier, right? So again, if we go back to our first example, if that champion has 3 items, so 100 becomes 150 becomes 200 becomes 250 with 3 items, and then you have the 6-piece trait, and that makes it 350. And yes, I know that should be multiplicative. I'm trying to be very abstract and keep it simple numbers here, right? You have at 350. So you look at that 3-cost champion and you go, its baseline is 100 and its maximum value is 350, okay? Now a traitless champion, like I said, just loses that multiplier. So the traitless champion can't be 100 because then its maximum potential would only be 250. It would be a worse champion. So you need to start it at a higher value. So let's say 150. That means now at baseline, the traitless champion is more powerful than a traded champion. But if you put items on it, so 150 becomes, let's say because it's a multiplier, it'll be 225, then 300, or sorry, we'll just keep it normal. 150 becomes 200, becomes 250, becomes 300, right? So its maximum potential is now 300, which is lower than the traded champion who has 350. But that's the trade-off, right? It's like a traitless champion has higher flexibility and higher baseline power at the trade-off of lower caps. And so traitless champions, for the most part, should not be on endgame boards that are absolutely capped. Now, the glorious thing about TFT is you don't always reach your cap, right? And that's what makes traitless champs so interesting, is that you can figure out ways to play them. And again, I think the best example of this was like the Rammus and Morgana, because like a Rammus tank and a Morgana carry were never going to be as good as other carries. But their utility and their flexibility still made them interesting choices. Now, hilariously enough, the augment, the oops all threats augment actually broke this, because again, using those same numerical values, if all of a sudden that 150 baseline champion that caps out at 300 has an augment that's boosting that up and giving them that power, now all of a sudden their cap is much higher. So again, I used a lot of numbers and I was pretty abstract here, but basically that's how we look at traitless champions. Now, what's interesting is you look at like Monster Hunter, or whatever they're called, Monster Trainer, and what we actually did is take those same numerical values, but we added a stacking layer to it, right? So normally a traitless champion would start stronger, but because we have the stacking on it, it actually starts about the same, maybe even a little weaker than a normal champion, which is why I think it's kind of struggling a bit. But assuming you play this traitless champion and you stack it up, that should get it close to a traded champion's level of power cap. And so that's kind of the experiment being run here, is like, can we have a traitless champion that starts weak but becomes as good as a traded champion? I think Smolder kind of proves that you can. Cog and Rammus have some work to go to get there, but yeah. And that's a lot of the times when you're designing how a champion fits into a set with their traits, abstractly, this is how you have to think about it, is what is their power value? And, if you want to get here, we'll use an anime reference here in DBZ terms. What's the power level of that champion, right? And I mean, that's all balance is trying to make sure the power level of all the various champions in the set are relatively in line with each other, given various trade-offs and potential mins and maximums based on the combinatorics that are possible within the game. So that's kind of how we go about it. So, or at least that's how I think about it. From there, it's just like, what would be a cool traitless champion, So, all right, 3 down, 2 to go. How do you gather data from casuals? So, this question to me is funny because I love this idea that, like, well, how do we gather data from hardcore people? Right? Like, what's the difference? Do you believe that casuals don't press the survey button that shows up on the League of Legends screen? Because they do. They do a lot. And in fact, hilariously enough, I would say it's actually easier to gather data from casuals because most of our players are casuals, But to give it a more sincere answer, all of our data gathering is done the same way, right? Through end of game surveys, through various social media, things like that. And when a player does a survey, we can automatically generate, like, what rank is the account? How many games did they play? Right? So, like, hypothetically, you could look at the data, and let's say you surveyed 20,000 people, which is a pretty good sample size. And of those 20,000, and these are fake numbers, 72% said the set was great. Okay, well then you can split that up and go, okay, how about of the people who are gold and lower, how many of those 20,000 were gold and lower? 9,812. Okay, still a decent sample size. How many of them said the set was great? 79%. Okay, so the set is doing well, and for casual players, it is erring a little more on better, and the hardcore players, it was like 68%. Right? And some data scientist or some insights person is looking at this and drawing conclusions from the survey data. Now, I always tend to be a little skeptical of this kind of data because it's like, I've seen people at the company sort of like 72% became 68%. That shows a decline. It's like, who cares? Like, that's a level of nitpicky and could be anything and variance in the cert. Like, I just don't care, Now, if 72% becomes 40%, that's a oopsie. But yeah, so like I said, a lot of our data gathering methods for casuals are the exact same thing. It's just, you can separate it out, right? Like, I just said gold as a metric, right? Well, here's another metric. Let's take those 20,000 survey results and now separate it by how many games they played in the previous set. How did people who played 0 games in the previous set feel about this set? How did people who played 1 to 30 games play? How did people who played more than 200 games feel? Right? And thankfully, TFT has a large enough audience that we get good sample sizes in our surveys. And the reality is, like, when you get enough sample size, you generally can assume that if you were somehow to survey the entire player base, your numbers will end up pretty similar. At least I think that's how statistics works. At least that's the theory. So, like I said, it's really the same methods. I don't think there's actually much difference in gathering data. I think, if anything, this question stems a little bit from an assumption that, like, I don't know, there's this weird thing where, like, there's this stigma around casual players that, like, people think they're idiots, or people think, it's like, I think you'd be surprised how many people are casual players, right? Like, I'm blanking on her name, which is bad, but I want to say Rosemary. The person who does the casting for TFT all the time, the host, the one that also does Pokemon. Again, this is why I'm bad with names I don't say over and over. But I would call her a casual. She literally casts TFT tournaments. I would call her a casual, by a lot of our definitions. And that's okay because, she's smart. She knows the game. Just because you don't play 500 games doesn't mean you don't know a lot about what you want or things like that, right? Like, hell, I would say 60% of my coworkers are casuals, but that's such an interesting thing because the definition of casual and hardcore is so fascinating, right? And so I think it would do gamers a lot of good to figure out the definition here, right? Is Frodin's wife a casual? Probably. I'm sure she could tell us exactly what she likes and doesn't like about TFT, So it's really not that hard. All right, last question. I can get through all 5. Oh yeah. What set has been the most complex? This is a tough one because it depends on what your definition of complex is. I'm going to assume the definition of complex here is the ability to understand the current game state and make a plan given the available information that is around and how much information you need to understand to make optimal plans. That is going to be my definition of complex, okay? Under that definition, I believe set 11 wins the award for most complex, specifically because the encounters created a situation where you had to be able to adapt to an unpredictable mutator on the game that made it so that, any plans had to change on a fly and you needed backup plans upon backup plans, right? If I'm planning on fast 8 and then we get the encounter that says rerolls cost 1 gold less. Am I still playing fast 8? Is that correct? What about all of a sudden we get the one, we start the game, I'm somebody who forces a comp and we get the encounter that says, the game ends, the Kane game, right? Like, do I know how to play that, right? And there were so many adaptions to what core TFT was in that set that a lot of people really struggled. I think the Kane encounter is a good example of this, where it's just how many times did we see on stream I would get the Kane encounter and somebody would be playing Fortune, and it's you can't do that, right? And it's well, no, they probably didn't, right? Because adapting to all of those unknown circumstances is hard, right? It requires a pretty good understanding of everything going on. I don't think we've had a set that has asked that much of you since then. Now, I think there are certainly, things that can be I would say 15 is a little high on this because understanding, the power-up system in particular right now, especially because the margin of what a good power-up is versus not a good power-up is, requires a pretty good understanding of mechanics. And that's where I think a lot of people right now are just kind of relying on tier lists. So I think you could make the argument that 15's high up there right now. I think you could make the argument that 8 was up there with all the hero augments and understanding all the different hero augments. But by comparison, I feel all of those were a bit more learnable. Yes, there was a lot of content, but once you learn it, it's pretty easy, right? It's still a straightforward path. If you make a tier list of all the power-ups and know that someone could literally write a guide that's just if you're playing this comp, look for these power-ups. Done. That's it. And you can now follow that guide and you'll do okay. But encounters weren't like that, right? Encounters were, hey, here's a guide to play this comp. Oh, well, you can't play that comp because this encounter says you can't play that comp this game. Well, I didn't know that. Why didn't you list that out, right? The combinatorics made a situation that I think most of our players were overwhelmed. So I think that is my vote. I think 11 encounter system wins the award for make TFT the most complex it's ever been, for that definition. Now, again, if you define complex as something different, your answer might be different, which is why it's important when you have these conversations to set up that definition so we're on the same page first, right? It's complex can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different players. So, right, someone might find shadow items complex because thinking about how to utilize the KISS curse was hard. But again, that to me is like, well, if you can write out a guide and predictably play it, not that complex. So yeah, set 11 is my answer. All right, I did it. I got through all 5 questions in 30 minutes. Bam, productive day. Look at that. We're taking our productivity into walk the dog. We're crushing it. Let's go. Now, today is Friday. Going to be winding down. Play test in the morning, couple meetings. They scheduled me a 4 o'clock on Friday interview. So I got to do that. But then that'll end my day. And I can get ready for stream. Taking my family to the mall this weekend. Do back to school shopping. Get them out of the house. That'll be fun. Yeah. Otherwise, pretty standard weekend. And then the cycle begins again. So, all right. Well, hopefully you guys have a great weekend. Keep giving the team feedback on the set and the patch. I'm going to keep working in Future World, bringing you lots of surprises. Got all the final ducks in a row on one of my projects that I'm bringing you to guys. One of the things I did this week, you guys will have in your hands before the end of the year, and I'm pretty excited about it. It's minor, but it'll bring you a smile, and that's the important thing. Oh, and then the prismatic orb conversation. I posted on Twitter. I wanted to get some second thoughts. I got my second thoughts. I have a solution on how to improve that system, I think. Oh, before I go, this is kind of a bonus answer, but one of the suggestions I saw for the prismatic orb was like, well, have it be an armory. And I thought of that, and what I'll say is I really didn't like the idea of you open an orb and it immediately pops open an armory, and then that, like, it's a lot of complexity for an orb like that. So from a balance standpoint, that's probably the best choice, but it's also will get solved very quickly, where it'll just be like, whenever you get a prismatic orb, make sure you just choose this choice, you know? So I wasn't a fan of that from a like game output standpoint, but I understand why it was suggested, and I think it wouldn't fail, right? It's just, yeah. But I think I have a different solve, and so the question will be, when can I get that in the game? But it might be a while. So things are a little tight. So. Okay, I'm going to go. Have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.